I guess people who can lie about a genocide feel licensed to lie even about the illegal detention and threatening of American citizens. If this happened anywhere else in the world, it would be a massive international incident.
The battle between Musk and Ro Khanna is because Ro said Elon Musk is a trillionaire and I want to take his money away from him and give it to other people.
Are you sad that Senator Lindsey Graham has died?
No, I'm not sad. I'm not celebrating it either. He argued for wars, including this Iran war that outlives him. He never met a Middle East country he didn't want to invade.
You've had amazing reviews for the book, Donald Trump, who over the weekend posted on TruthSocial the book was a joke. 90% of his contents were fake news.
I remember back in 2019, I did a story that he really didn't like. They said to me, the president has a message he wanted me to pass on to you. And I said, oh, what's that? I said, he wants you to know that you're a piece of shit.
On Friday night, Senator Lindsey Graham was speaking to Ukraine's President Zelensky in Kyiv and talking up the tough new US sanctions on Russia. The following night, he died suddenly in Washington, D.C. If nothing else, it's a moment to reflect on the fragility of life and to pay respect to a giant of US politics. But that's just not how it goes anymore. Social media and later the airways were quickly filled with outrageous, gleeful commentary about his untimely death, proving once again that there are no taboos left. The same thing is happening in the UK, where shocking news broke on Friday that legendary Conservative MP Ann Widdecombe had been murdered at the age of 78. In both cases, there are tasteless jokes, bitter celebrations, and wild conspiracy theories. In both cases, people have every right to feel and say whatever they like. And I have every right to feel and say that they are deplorable and classless. Many people didn't like the way that Senator Graham operated, and they didn't like his politics. He made himself one of the great DC survivors by cozying up to President Trump when it suited him, and he was also for decades one of the most ferocious hawks in politics, with claws sharpened for just about every war the US could possibly get involved in. Most recently, he was one of the loudest cheerleaders for the disastrous Iran war, which is now raging all over again, as we will discuss. There's a time and a place to debate his ideas and his legacy, and there's a respectful way of doing so. Celebrating his death is not that. And I said exactly the same thing when President Trump jumped on the graves of Robert Mueller and Rob Reiner. When tragedy strikes, remember the words you probably were taught when you were 4 years old. If you've got nothing nice to say, well, just shut up. Well, Mehdi Hasan and Hogan Gidley are standing by, but we begin with a man who's made a lot of headlines this weekend, Democratic Congressman for California, Ro Khanna. Congressman Khanna, welcome to Uncensored again. You hit the news because you were detained, you said, in the West Bank in Israel for 90 minutes by armed Israeli settlers during a visit there last week. You posted on X, Israeli settlers brandishing American-made M4s detained me and other Americans on my trip to Palestine. When the IDF arrived, they sided with the settlers and continued our detention. They made a huge mistake. Now, you were visiting a small Palestinian village that was abandoned after escalating attacks from settlers and then demolished. You were eventually allowed to continue your journey, but this has created a huge firestorm, obviously. A spokesman for the Israeli military said it received a report of Israeli civilians unlawfully blocking the vehicles of foreign nationals and members of the news media near the village. Troops were dispatched to reopen the road. The spokesman said the military disputed its soldiers had participated in blocking the exit and said the identity of the armed civilian was being reviewed. And when Benjamin Netanyahu was asked about this, he said this.
We're a country of laws, and people who break the law, we take them to court. In the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, we've had thousands of attempted attacks and warnings against terrorist activities, against innocent Israelis, families, mother with their children driving along the road. They're stopped by terrorists and they kill them. And this has happened again and again and again. There is a vigilante effort, not by the settler community. They're 99.9%, law-abiding citizens. I don't want vigilantes of any kind, and we are working to put them under the law. But I think if we put things in perspective, we should see that we have thousands of attacks and some few, but obvious breaking of the law. Then we apply the full measure of the law against them.
Now, what's interesting about this is that Haaretz, which is one of the big newspapers over there, wrote an editorial on the incident in which it was entitled, Ro Khanna got the VIP version of what West Bank Palestinians face every day. And certainly there have been myriad reports of appalling behaviour by Israeli settlers against Palestinians, very aggressive expansion of settlements, and repeated evidence in these reports of the IDF siding with the settlers, even when they appear to be committing crimes. So, Haaretz is not wrong here by categorising this as being you, as an American over there, obviously encountering what Palestinians get all the time. So a long-winded intro, my apologies for that. But Ro Khanna, your response in particular to what Netanyahu said there?
Well, I appreciate your laying out all the facts. I am just stunned that Americans are detained by vigilantes. A foreign government cooperates with those vigilantes, and the American factual account is being disputed. I don't understand it. I mean, there was a New York Times photographer there. It's not just my testimony. It is the testimony of Israelis who were with me. It is the testimony of security forces. It was written up in detail in Reuters and the New York Times. And the prime minister is denying what happened. His ambassador is denying what happened. I guess people who can lie about a genocide feel licensed to lie even about the illegal detention and threatening of American citizens. But what is outrageous is if this happened anywhere else in the world, it would be a massive international incident, and it would require the government to immediately arrest the people who did this and to investigate the soldiers who did this.
A lot of your critics, as you know, because they've come racing out to criticise you, the Israeli ambassador to the US, Dr. Michael Leiter, said you mischaracterised it. He accused you of visiting the West Bank as a political stunt to distract from your past support of Graham Plattner, the former Maine US Senate candidate accused of sexual assault, and to promote your own presidential run for the White House in 2028. What do you say to that?
Well, he didn't describe any of my 3 previous visits to Israel as political stunts. What bothers them is that I said I wanted to have a Palestinian-led tour through the West Bank. And I informed the Israeli government that I was going. Obviously, I got through the airport. They helped me get back home. But what bothers them is that I said I was going to visit Palestine from a Palestinian perspective. And it's not just about me. They don't want other American politicians to do that. Just today, Piers, there was body camera footage released about this whole incident, which shows that the IDFs were siding with the settlers. And so the ambassador is on national television just lying. Now, their hope is that America just moves on and they can obfuscate the facts. But they're really risking the anger of a lot of people in America because this was how they treated American passport holders.
And what is extraordinary is it comes against a backdrop of Israel getting more and more unpopular globally, but especially in the United States, with nearly 2/3 of US adults now having a negative view of Israel, which is significantly up year on year. I've repeatedly called out members of the Israeli government like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir in particular, whose rhetoric and actions, and in particular actually involving the aggressive expansion of settlements on the West Bank and the IDF complicity in that, these guys, they don't seem to care about how unpopular they make Israel if they can have license to achieve their bigger plan, which appears to be expelling all the Palestinians out of Gaza, out of the West Bank, getting rid of maybe up to 1 million people out of southern Lebanon as well now, that they have a grand plan here and they don't really care about global opprobrium for it.
You're absolutely right. It's just the utter arrogance of power. Here's what would happen in a normal situation. Let's say this happened to me in Saudi Arabia or China, not necessarily always aligned with the United States. You would have the head of state or some cabinet member come out and say, we absolutely condemn what happened to Congressman Khanna and the other Americans. We will make sure that we take prosecutorial action against the vigilantes who did this, and we will have an internal investigation. This is not how we do business, and we're sorry that this happened to Americans. And if they did that, it would be a one-day story. But the fact that they are calling into question my credibility, calling into credibility the New York Times photographer, the New York Times journalist, the Israeli citizens who were testifying to this, denying that there was anything wrong. It just shows how arrogant they are to deny things that people are seeing with their own eyes on video.
What do you make as a high-profile American politician of some of the more vicious commentary about the death of Lindsey Graham, who, I had a lot of issues with some of his stances, not least on the war in Iran, for example, and other wars. He was big on war. But I interviewed him a number of times. I once interviewed him with John McCain and Joe Lieberman, the three amigos, all together, actually. I went down to the Senate and did them there for CNN. It was an amazing experience. And he also did a lot of bipartisan work, crossing the aisle and making things happen with Democrats. So there was a lot of good in him, as well as things I didn't agree with. But this place we've got to as a society, and we're seeing the same here in the UK after the death of Ann Widdecombe, a famous Conservative member of Parliament here, the glee that some people seem to want to express in the immediate aftermath of a human being's death. And we've seen it, as I said in the intro, from Donald Trump towards people like Rob Reiner and Robert Mueller and people like this. I don't like that either. What do you feel about this? What should we do about this as a society?
I actually agreed with your monologue, your introduction, that if you don't have something nice to say about someone who has passed, you can keep your mouth shut at that time. I mean, look, Lindsey Graham and I had very different views on foreign policy, but he's someone who wore the nation's uniform. He served in the Air Force. He questioned his own party on immigration, saying that there should be a path to citizenship. He would engage in debate. And it's not just being uncivil. It shows that in our country, we're no longer to see the humanity in any way of people who have any different view, that we are so wedded that we have a monopoly on the truth. The essence of liberalism is to have a humility that you may not have the whole truth, that in a country of 330 million, maybe you should have some sense of listening to other people and having debate. And so there's something really wrong with our political culture that we can't have a decency when someone passes away who we strongly disagree with.
You had a run-in also with Elon Musk. He threatened to sue you after you accused him of possibly sentencing 4.5 million children to death with the cuts to the US Agency for International Development. You said in a podcast last month, they're celebrating that he created 4,500 millionaires, but they don't talk about the 4.5 million children around the world who he possibly sentenced to death by dismantling USAID. He responded by calling you a liar and a robber, while also accusing you of insider stock trading. Time to sue this liar, Musk wrote. You responded to that by pointing to a 2025 study that determined that without access to USAID resources and funding, 14 million people in lower middle income countries could die by 2030, including more than 4.5 million children under the age of 5. You also said, Elon, I thought you were a free speech guy. Why not debate me on these issues instead of threatening lawfare? Has he actually gone through with suing you or not?
He hasn't. I was a bit surprised. You become a trillionaire, the richest person in the world, and you're obsessing about a statement I made. And it obviously got under his skin because the cuts that he did to Doge had real-world consequences. And I cited 2 academic studies, the Lancet study and Adil Gawande's study, saying that when he cut food and medicine from some of the poorest people, that potentially could have led to deaths. And it's surprising to me that he threatened a lawsuit because, he claims he's all for free speech. But I'm happy to debate him or the ideas on their merit, and I wish he would do that.
Just finally, there's, as we've been talking, a post from Donald Trump on his TruthSocial platform saying the Hormuz Strait is open and will remain open with or without Iran. We are reinstating the Iranian blockade, so named because it's only stopping Iran ships or customers from entering or leaving. All other countries will have fair and open use of the Strait. The USA will be, from this point forward, known as the guardian of the Hormuz Strait. But as such, in a matter of fairness, we will be reimbursed at the rate of 20% on all cargo shipped for any and all costs necessary to do the job of providing safety and security to this very volatile section of the world. The process of formation will begin immediately. There's a very competing narrative here because the Iranians appear to be exercising control over the strait and appear to have shut it down again. Donald Trump is adamant that it is open and will remain open, but just in the way that the Iranians are charging a toll and want to have a toll process for ships going through there safely with their backing, Trump is now saying he wants 20% of all value of all cargo shipped to provide security for ships going through. Does any of this make sense to you?
Pierre, the greatest tragedy with Donald Trump is he didn't listen to Winston Churchill's basic advice that to be a statesperson, you had to read history. And had Donald Trump read any history about what happened with Mossadegh and the overthrow of Mossadegh in 1953, because Mossadegh wanted to nationalize Iranian oil, and how the cardinal sin of the overthrow of Mossadegh has destabilized the region, he would never make a statement that the United States somehow wants to take over the Strait of Hormuz and engage in a kind of gunboat diplomacy. He would instead be working with the international community to make sure that we had the denuclearization of Iran, some kind of agreement, and not provoking them by threatening to conquer the Strait of Hormuz or take over the Strait of Hormuz. It is its illiteracy of world history and American history that, in my view, is his actually greatest weakness.
Finally, on Sunday, you said you regretted endorsing the former Maine Senate candidate, Graham Plattner, who's now dropped out of a Senate race after an ex-girlfriend came forward and alleged he sexually assaulted her. He's denied those allegations but has dropped out. You said you got the call wrong. I endorse a lot of people, but when I make a mistake, I take accountability. You were criticised for endorsing him even after a photograph emerged of Plattner with a tattoo on his chest that resembled a Nazi symbol, and there was already backlash over online remarks about survivors of sexual assault and so on after other girlfriends had claimed he was aggressive towards them. I guess my question to you would be, when it comes to these kind of things, the feeling that people get is that politicians get very tribal, that if the situation had been reversed and this was a Republican candidate, you'd have been straight out the traps, along with a lot of Democrats, saying this is disgusting, he's got to stand down and so on, much quicker than you distanced yourself from Plattner because he was on your side. What do you say to people that feel that?
Fair. First of all, I think that's a fair criticism, and I appreciate you're giving this the appropriate attention. In some other interviews, it becomes half the questions as opposed to one question of many things in the world. But look, do politicians give the benefit of the doubt to their own side? Yes. Do I need to be more sensitive to the biases we bring? Yes. Should we think about how we treat the imperfections of our opponents and people on the other side with far less forgiveness than we do our own side? Yes. And that's what I said when I said I made a mistake, that I should have seen the signs earlier, and I probably should reflect more about this bias that we have in politics and why I owned up to the mistake of getting this call wrong.
Do you know what? That might be one of the most honest things a politician has said to me in the entire time I've done this show. So I appreciate that. Ro Khanna, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Summer is almost upon us, and if you're not completely satisfied with your beach body, my condolences, that must be hard for you. It's not just because you're watching the World Cup and drinking beer. Once men hit their 30s, it's harder for the body to lose fat, retain muscle, and recover from injuries. The main culprit is testosterone, which drops off as you age. That's why you hear so many guys talking about it, taking it, and why they feel so much better for doing so. Well, there's no shortage of products available, so we wanted to choose one that's all natural, third-party tested, and made in the USA. Mars Men is exactly that. It's designed to support healthy levels, which can help your body to burn fat more efficiently and build lean muscle. No weird synthetic additives. For a limited time, we've teamed up to give our viewers and listeners 50% off for life, plus free shipping and 3 free gifts at mengotomars.com. That's mengotomars.com for 50% off and 3 free gifts at checkout. And remember to tell them that I sent you. Well, joining me now to debate all this is Mehdi Hasan, founder of Zeteo, and Hogan Gidley, the former White House Deputy Press Secretary. Mehdi, that was quite something to hear a politician just say, yeah, I was biased, I was partisan, my thinking about this, my judgment was skewed, effectively what he was saying, by the fact this was a Democrat who was involved in a scandal, and that he would have felt differently if it had been a Republican, and he's got to think about that. I always like it when a politician shows self-awareness, a bit of brutal honesty, and tells us what we're all pretty much thinking anyway.
No, I agree with you. And I think Ro Khanna has won over a lot of admirers because that is the approach he takes to politics. He's quite honest. He tries to be transparent. Excuse me, I've lost my voice after shouting at the screen on Saturday after the game. So,
do you know what? There are millions of people around the world, Mehdi Hasan, absolutely jubilant, not at the result on Saturday, but the fact you've lost your voice.
Oh, not quite. I'll get it back. I'll get it back for this discussion.
Including Hogan Gidley.
And for Wednesday's game, of course. It'll be back for Wednesday and then gone again Thursday. But I think, look, Ro Khanna has been admired by a lot of people for doing that. He goes into a lot of spaces that other politicians don't go into. He's obviously running for president in 2028. He's a guy who goes on Fox and talks to Republican audiences. In fact, funnily enough, Piers, you mentioned Elon Musk threatening to sue him. I pointed out to Musk, I tweeted at Musk, which of course he ignores me, that Musk used to be a big fan of Ro Khanna. He used to praise Ro Khanna as a guy who could reach across the aisle. Now he hates him because Ro Khanna called him out.
That is true. Hogan Gidley, welcome back to Uncensored. Just in response to this breaking news from Donald Trump about the Hormuz Strait, because it seems to me, you know President Trump better than most, it seems to me he's got himself into an unholy mess with this Iran war. If he could get out of it cleanly tomorrow in a way that didn't look like an abject failure, he would. But it's impossible to do that. And the Iranians are continuing to exercise control of this strait. And as long as they have that, it's hard to listen to what Donald Trump says about the Americans now running it, keeping it open, charging 20% on all cargo shipped. That all sounds great. But the evidence seems to suggest that it's just not actually what's happening. The evidence seems to suggest the Iranians have control of this strait.
Before I get to that, man, make a comment about Ro, since I'm up in the House of Representatives all the time. He is clearly running for president of the United States. His measured tone is one that he's trying to bring into the party and say, look at me, I can be conciliatory, but also I'm a fighter. But the battle between Musk and Ro Khanna is because Ro said Elon Musk is a trillionaire and I want to take his money away from him and give it to other people. What Ro doesn't say is that he has hundreds of millions of dollars himself. And if we're going to get into the business of saying, I want that person's money and I'm going to take it from them and then give it to somebody else, I choose myself as the recipient of Ro Khanna's money, and I want big pieces of that for me. That's why he's mad.
But that wasn't actually the point of contention between them. The point of contention between them focused on the cuts that were made by Doge to USAID and the potential
and
the potential impact though of those cuts on the lives of children in particular, which have been well reported. Now, Elon may want to contest those, but they are widely reported that one of the consequences could be a lot of people dying, including children.
He should engage, because I'd like to see a report that says it's the United States' responsibility and or reason or rationale of existing to pay for everybody else around the world when we have our own problem right here at home. That's really probably part and parcel of the with the larger argument, which is it's a difference in where the money should go and where it should be spent on. The Republicans writ large want that money spent here in America. Democrats want it spent all over the world to fund all kinds of crazy projects. And so that's the real debate.
Maybe you want to respond to that?
Can I respond on that specific point? Hogan's right. Of course, it's not America's responsibility to feed and provide aid to everyone in the world. That's not the debate. The debate is, should Elon Musk have sent a bunch of 20-year-olds with no qualifications or expertise into USAID to gut the department overnight? I think Musk's words were, I fed it into the wood chipper this weekend while you were all out partying, to cut off aid overnight, to leave USAID officials and diplomats and aid workers stuck in foreign countries. Some of them had to be, helicoptered out because suddenly all the funding got cut off. off, their laptops got shut down, and people did lose access to aid overnight in soup kitchens and in aid clinics all over the world. Nick Kristof of The Times went and got names of children who died, and he gave them to Elon Musk, and Musk keeps ignoring it. Musk keeps saying, there are no kids. Where are the kids who died? Nick Kristof gave him a list publicly, and Musk, of course, ignored it. And the academic evidence does suggest, from multiple sources, including the Lancet Medical Journal, that millions of kids will die, that tens of thousands of children have already died as a result of these Trump-Musk Doge cuts. And that's the real issue. And by the way, to say we don't have money for it, Hogan, how much are we spending on this Iran war that you promised we wouldn't have, that your president and you said during 2024, no more wars? We're spending $50, $100 billion, way more than the USAID budget in Afghanistan or Sudan. So please don't say we don't have the money for it when we always have money for war.
Well, first of all, that money goes to support and protect the American people and our interests around the world. And I didn't say we wouldn't get into any wars. What I said was the same thing Donald Trump said.
Trump said no more wars. Those were his words.
He said he wouldn't get into stupid wars or long-term.
Nope, he said no more wars. Those were his exact words. I have them in front of me.
And that's what he meant in the context, and you know that. That's fine. We can debate where that money should be spent and how it should go to different groups. But what Elon Musk and Doge did was kind of pull back the curtain on the radical leftist woke policies and ideologies of our dollars being spent in these foreign countries to fund all types of radical, weird behavior, as opposed to trying to help and prop up the veterans here in this country.
No, we were funding AIDS prevention.
Hogan, I would say
it was a George Bush program.
Hang on.
It was a George W. Bush program.
Mehdi, just to remind you, it's still currently my show. Despite your failing voice, you have a tendency to forget that sometimes. Hogan, you know, the point I think people would make about this is you could make a lot of cuts to obvious waste. Some of the stuff Doge uncovered clearly was waste and should absolutely have been stopped. I saw that multiple times. But I think they went too far. I think the cuts were too dramatic, implemented too quickly, and these things do have real-world consequences. And I guess my point to you about, well, who do you help around the world? I mean, is your position that the United States shouldn't help anybody? And if it isn't, then who should they help, and how much should they be spending on helping people that were being covered by USAID?
Well, first of all, let me ask you, because you just brought up the point, what cuts were okay? Did you find okay?
Well, like I said, there were a number of things, I mean, I can't remember the exact ones now, but I remember when they were being done in real time, a number of things being reported, Elon was saying them himself, where I was nodding away, going, well, that makes sense, and that makes sense. Yeah, that looks like waste.
But what about Ebola?
Right, but there were so there were certain things in there where I thought, hang on, that seems a risk, a big risk. Why would you do that? Other things seemed a little bit inhumane, a little cruel. But ultimately, it comes down to the question I posed to you, which is, what is America's moral responsibility to the rest of the world? Because on one level, President Trump and you were taking a very strong position in the run-up to the last election, which was America first, America first, America first. No more meddling in stupid wars, like you put it, and so on. Focus on getting cost of living down. Focus on American lives. A lot of people voted for President Trump on that basis, right? But that, you know, that conflicts with reality. And the reality has been this sudden war with Iran that's proven to be unbelievably expensive, costly to American military lives, is still ongoing, despite we were being told it was all over in 2 to 3 weeks. Here we are, 4 months later. It's still raging. The Iranians, the regime is in place. The IRGC are in control. They control the Strait of Hormuz. They're still firing rockets and missiles at the neighbouring Gulf states. All of this is terrible. All of this could constitute, many people would argue, a stupid war.
Well, remember, Americans were taken hostage in the October 7th massacre, as you well know. Americans have been killed by Iranians for the last,
that's all true.
Years in this country, no question. From Hillary Clinton to Barack Obama to Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, they all said Iran can't get a nuclear weapon and shouldn't. Donald Trump was the first president to say, you know what, I'm going to try and do something about it and prevent that from happening.
What has he done to stop that? Because as far as I'm concerned, they've still got every single tiny piece of their enriched uranium, right? We were told last summer in the 12-day war that their nuclear capability had been put back decades, Donald Trump's words, not mine. Right. And yet here we were 8 months later having to go to war with them because according to Donald Trump today in an interview, they were literally like minutes away from getting one and using it. So none of these things, they can't all be true.
But many of them can be simultaneously. Donald Trump and the moves they made at the Fordo nuclear plant and others was one of the most successful military operations, strategic military operations of all time. And while it did
how could it have been,
program,
Hogan? With all due respect, how can that be true? And it also be true that only 8 months after that incredibly successful operation, suddenly America had to go to war in Iran to stop them doing what we were told 8 months earlier had been put back decades. That can't all be true.
It's not going to stop them from attempting to gain nuclear weapons, as you well know. In addition, I'm sure there were some sites that maybe weren't struck in that particular military operation. That being said, we know the design of the Iranian leaders. They've been very open about it. The death and destruction of Israel and the death and destruction of America. That's what they want to do. So if Donald Trump can use our military to prevent that from happening, not just for this generation, but for future generations
Where's
ahead,
the win right now, Hogan? Mehdi, I will come to you. I'm just giving your voice a rest. It needs it. The vocal cords need a rest. But Hogan, where's the win right now? 4 months into a war that Donald Trump said would last 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not seeing a win here for the US unless I'm missing something.
Well, you know already, they've talked about ruining their ballistic missile capabilities with military strikes. The nuclear program's been set back. Their ability to pay for their proxies that commit terrorism all over the world is part and parcel of this too. But as you said, now we're at a different spot. And as I've long commented, that if this appears to be a win, it won't really matter to the American people because it will look like a win. Now, how does that look moving forward to accomplish that? Are we going to have to take Carg Island? Are we going to have to take control of the Strait? I don't know that. They have military experts that have been deciding these types of outcomes for a long time, gaming this out in the Situation Room, the Pentagon, and other places. So I would imagine in the coming days and weeks, what you're going to see is an even further frustrated Donald Trump, because inevitably what we knew was going to happen was that there were some entrenched radical leaders who were committing acts of atrocity, of course, while they were talking to some people in that government that were more moderate. When I believe they made deals with them, it was the radical side that took over, the radical side that began to fire off missiles, et cetera. And I think Donald Trump's pretty much fed up with it. He's had enough of it. And that's why you see the retaliatory strikes, upward of 90, 150 different installations struck over this past weekend.
OK, Mehdi, I mean, the problem is the Iranians are hitting back. They still appear to be in control of the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump is saying it's open and will remain open. He's now going to do this charge on cargo shipped and so on. That again, those two positions can't both be true, right? We can only go on what we're seeing, and what we're seeing is a very small number of ships getting through that strait, which we know causes enormous damage to the global economic energy market, right? So this is dragged on and on and on. I do think Trump is frustrated. I do think he's pissed off with all this. And I do suspect that if we gave him his time again, he wouldn't have got into this. But he is where he is with it. What do you think is now, in reality, happening?
So, you know, there's the famous phrase, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. This idea that Trump is going to start a blockade again, start bombing again, start threatening Carg Island again, and anything fundamentally will change is absurd. We know that it won't change. We know the two sides are locked into this position. They both have their strengths and weaknesses. We know that negotiations is the only way to deal with the nuclear program. That was what was on the table on February 28th, that Trump and Netanyahu decided to wreck together. And the war is a disaster. Let me just deal with a lot of things that Hogan has said. Number one, you know, just on USAID, just one last point. The idea this was some woke lefty department. The left were very critical of USAID for many years. One of the programs that the Doge really undermined was the anti-AIDS program, PEPFAR, George Bush's program. Marco Rubio was one of the biggest champions of USAID, as was the late Lindsey Graham, I should say. So this was not some left-wing thing. Even Republicans used to recognize that aid abroad is a good thing for the United States. Number two, on terms of the actual war and how it's going, it's funny that Hogan said, well, what about the ballistic missiles? Well, according to US intelligence, Iran still retains 70% of its ballistic missile capability. And the funniest thing about debating Trump people is Trump always throws you under the bus. Hogan's saying ballistic missiles are bad. But I heard Trump say a couple of weeks ago that it's fine for Iran to have ballistic missiles. They have a right to have ballistic missiles. And when a reporter said, wait, hold on, you want Iran to have ballistic missiles? He goes, well, I can't tell them not to if everyone else has them. So Trump is all over the place on this. A month ago, he said the Iranian regime were good people, nice people, smart people, rational people. Over the weekend, he said they're evil, sick people. This is the most erratic man who has ever held any kind of power in this country. And as for going to war, Hogan says stupid war. Piers, you rightly say this is a stupid war. And by the way, he didn't just say stupid war. He said no more wars in multiple rallies. Hogan was the campaign press secretary in 2024. He was there when Donald Trump said, I don't have wars, he said. He said on election night, I'm going to stop wars. I'm not going to start a war. He started this war for no good reason because Lindsey Graham and Benjamin Netanyahu and others persuaded him to do this ridiculous war. And now we're in this stupid war where oil prices are up. He also said, by the way, Hogan, you remember, he said, I'm going to end inflation on day one. We're going to bring prices down. Instead, we've got gas prices going up and up and up because the Iranians know if they hold out for the midterms, it's going to hurt Trump and the Republicans. They have their own incentive for keeping this going. And Piers, I don't know if I said it on this show or another show, but I said, this war is not over when the MOU was signed, when the so-called ceasefire was done.
Yeah, I don't think anybody thought it was. I honestly think Donald Trump is scrabbling to find an exit ramp, and he's finding it really hard because the Iranians...
escalating to exit is not a good move.
But you don't think 47 years of terror and October 7th was a good enough reason to...
So why didn't he say that on the campaign trail, Hogan?
Well,
why didn't he say,
Hogan,
I'm going to become president and I'm going to go to war with Iran to punish them for 1979?
Well, actually, I would say, I would look at it differently. Look, you've got a lot of bad actors around the world. You've got North Korea, you've got Russia, you've got China, you've got others, right? And America doesn't march in and attack all those countries for good reason, right? Simply being a bad regime, as we learned...
Also, they have nukes, Piers.
Well, as we learned...
They have nukes,
I know, that's the point. But the principle should be the same. I remember with the Iraq War debate in 2003, I opposed that very vociferously. Because I just thought this makes no sense. And it backfired horribly and had 20 years of mayhem and led to the rise of ISIS and so on. You don't necessarily have to march in and attack bad actors in regions. Now, I will never defend a thing this regime has done in Iran. They're a despicable, awful regime that oppresses its people, and they've clearly supplied arms and resources to a bunch of terror groups in the Middle East. All of that is inarguable. But my concern from day one, and I said it on day one, is what is the war objective here? Is it to get rid of the regime? And if it isn't, the very last thing you should want to do at the end of this war is empower the regime. And I have a horrible feeling that by working out the unexpectedly huge impact of being able to control the Strait of Hormuz, this Iranian regime now feels more emboldened and more powerful than it did 4 months ago. That's my honest problem with this.
Foreign policy, as you know, is fraught with a whole bunch of different issues. I've traveled with the president all over the world. We went to North Korea, actually, China, et cetera, to deal with some of the geopolitical threats that this country faces. Now, they're not imminent threats. They're more economic. They're not military in nature, in that they're not doing kinetic activity in the moment and funding terrorism to try and kill Americans, which Iran, as you pointed out, clearly has done. But most news reports pretty clearly have pointed out different pockets within this Iranian regime. And as Donald Trump said, we kind of did get rid of the regime because we killed everybody in line for control of Iran. However, there are two basically competing groups. One, very militant. I'm going to use the word old school to define, use the words old school to define them. They're the ones who really want to continue down the path of death and destruction, stated goals of killing Americans, killing Jews, et cetera, versus ones who may be a little bit more moderate. And I guarantee you this administration has spoken to both factions in both groups. It appears that when we do move toward a memorandum of understanding, it's because we've had conversations with those who tend to be a little bit more sensible and maybe care about the well-being of their own people. And then, of course, those who don't, who have killed many tens of thousands of their own people, tend to take control by striking targets, killing civilians, and then Donald Trump has to change.
This reminds me, what this reminds me of, though, Hogan, it reminds me of the scorpion and the frog tale, which I won't repeat because everybody knows it, but it reminds me about the scorpion. Scorpions tend to behave like scorpions. I just want to end very quickly, Mehdi, because we run out of time.
Hold on. Just on the Iran point, I've got to say very quickly.
No, you can't. You can't, because I've got another guest waiting.
Well, I waited half an hour to come on this show, and then you'd save my vocal cord. So let me just say this. The Iranian regime, to say there's been regime change in Iran is gaslighting of the highest order.
I agree.
We've replaced Ayatollah Khamenei with Ayatollah Khamenei, a more radical, hardline version, who has much more of an incentive to get nukes.
Mehdi, I agree with you 100%. So let's forget that. I just want to ask you very finally, Mehdi, are you sad that Senator Lindsey Graham has died?
No, I'm not sad. I'm not celebrating it either, as you suggested in your introduction. I think it's a bit of a straw man to say everyone's celebrating his death. I think as journalists, Piers, you and I, we hold power accountable. We speak truth to power. I'm not of the school that says when a politician dies, a public figure dies, we treat them like a private figure and just shut up. I don't think journalism should turn into hagiography. At Zeteo, for example, we published a list of what Graham said and did. We just let the facts speak for themselves. He was a man who said awful things, genocidal things, racist things, and we put that on the record for people to see. That doesn't mean he didn't also do, I'm sure, good things in Congress as well, but overwhelmingly he argued for wars, including this Iran war that outlives him, that killed 100 schoolgirls on day one of the war. He argued for the Iraq war that you and I opposed, that killed over 1 million people. He never met a Middle East country he didn't want to invade, and I think that's how we should remember him. We should remember the full record. The problem is when powerful people die, people in our media, especially mainstream corporate media, want to just do hagiography and say, what a wonderful person they were. Weren't they lovely? And I'm sure many of those powerful people were lovely and they have families who love them. But as journalists, our job is to say, here's what they did. Here's the truth about their life and record. Here's an accurate obituary. And with Lindsey Graham, the man has a ton of blood on his hands and we shouldn't just forget that.
No one's asking anyone to forget the record of politicians, but I do think in the immediate aftermath of public figures dying, unless they're genocidal maniacs like, Hitler or Mao or Stalin, Hogan, there should be a modicum of respect for the death of a human being. And my issue with this, it doesn't just relate to the left.
Tell that to Donald Trump.
Well, I was going to make the point. I mean, Hogan, I presume you would be appalled by the reaction from many on the left to Lindsey Graham's death, as I have been.
There aren't many on the left.
But of course, there are many, actually. I've seen so much of it online.
And it's honestly, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, every prominent Democrat.
It is disgusting. It was after Charlie Kirk got murdered. It is disgusting. However, my question...
You didn't call Donald Trump disgusting, Piers. You didn't call Donald Trump disgusting.
If you let me do my
when
job
he said it about Rob Reiner.
If you let me host my own show, I was about to
let me speak at equal amount of time, I will.
Hogan, Gidley, if given that we should all be able to condemn the reaction of the left to the death of Lindsey Graham and to Charlie Kirk and others on the right, would you also condemn the way that Donald Trump has talked about Robert Mueller, Rob Reiner and others that he doesn't like who die when he trashes them in public quite quickly? Because I never like him doing that. I always think it's wrong, particularly given he's the President of the United States.
Well, do you condemn what they said and lied about Donald Trump as well? Both Rob Reiner and Robert Mueller?
Well, I don't think that's a relevant point. Everyone's entitled to criticise the President of the United States. The point is, should the President use his pulpit to attack Rob Reiner when he's just been murdered? I don't think he should.
Those people have attacked him. He responded in kind. Listen, I was executive director of the South Carolina Republican Party in Lindsey Graham's era. I've known the man for a long time. Was he right on every issue? Did I agree with him on every issue? No. But he loved his country. He loved his constituents in the state of South Carolina. He loved being a United States senator.
So did Robert Mueller.
You can hate his policies. You can not like some of his votes. I got crossways with him a couple of times. Remember, in the first Trump administration, he wasn't on board with Donald Trump's closed border policies by any stretch. On the North Lawn, I said when I was at the state party in South Carolina, he got booed off the stage for supporting George W. Bush's amnesty. We called him Grahamnesty for a reason. And his staff called me and said, hey, you're off the Christmas card list, right? We laughed about it, and Lindsey Graham finally came on board with the proper policy, which is to protect the American people first. And he cozied up to Donald Trump because he knew that he had enough power and sway within the United States Senate to get things done for the America First movement. He was a patriot. You can disagree with him, Mehdi, all you want to. You can not like the wars. I don't like the wars either. But the fact is, the man was a public servant his entire life.
But I didn't say good. I'm glad he's dead.
You know what?
I didn't say good. I'm glad he's dead.
I think it would be nice. I think it would be nice in public life if every time a big American public servant, someone's given their life to public life in America or the UK, anywhere actually, if both sides just manage to show a modicum of respect
Piers,
when somebody dies. I don't think it's too much to ask.
But
then
Piers,
then he can get into the legacy stuff.
But
Give
Piers,
it a beat. Give it a beat. Give it a day or
Piers,
two.
the problem is, you say you're on.
That's my view.
Hold on, let me make this point. Last point, then you can cut me off. You say you're in the middle and fair on this. You said the left yesterday. I read your tweet.
Yeah.
Despicably cruel, heartless, and abusive. The least kind people on earth.
Yeah.
You did not say that when Donald Trump said the same thing to Mueller and Ryan.
Actually,
I checked.
I have regularly criticised him. I have regularly.
You said take away his phone.
I have regularly criticised him. I have regularly called him out when he does that. I didn't like him doing it with John McCain or Colin Powell.
But you didn't call him despicably cruel.
No, I do think it's despicable. So let me be clear.
You do think,
right?
Okay, good.
But there's
I love
nothing.
it when we end
to
on
me,
agreement.
there's nothing
we
more
both agree
hypocritical.
it was despicable.
Nothing more hypocritical than people with the hashtag "Be Kind" in their bio on social media.
Do you think it's despicably cruel for Donald Trump to attack the Kennedy family on the day their granddaughter Tatiana Schlossberg
when
died?
they die? That is the least be kind thing imaginable. Anyway, I'm going to be kind and put your voice out of its misery. Thank you, Mehdi. Always good to have you. And Hogan, I always appreciate you coming on too. So thank you very much indeed for giving me your time.
Thank you.
Anytime. Thanks.
Well, joining me now is Jonathan Swan, the co-author of the explosive new book, Regime Change, Inside the Imperial Presidency of Donald Trump. Jonathan, welcome to Uncensored.
Thanks for having me, Piers.
As an author, I am insanely jealous of the quite staggering amounts of books you have sold in the previous week. So many congratulations.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
For those who've not read the book yet, and there aren't many on planet Earth, judging by your sales, what is your overarching view of Donald Trump, who's now been president for a total of 6 years, straddling 2.5 terms?
Well, I think one reason, hopefully, the book is resonating with a wide audience is we give a nuanced picture of Donald Trump. The book is not a polemic. It's a reported story of how he returned to the presidency and how he's wielding power in ways that we haven't seen for a very long time in this country. In some respects, we've never seen it in some of the aspects of how he's using power. But we show all aspects of Donald Trump. We show, the incredible charisma and talent for mass communication. I've never seen a movement bond with a leader like I have with Donald Trump. We show his obsession with revenge, which has been a thread throughout this administration. We show what I would describe as a sort of feral instinct for power. No president has wielded power over his own party in the way that Donald Trump did last year. There is no precedent, actually, for that. And we show all aspects, foreign policy. He is taking huge risks on the global stage in this term in ways that make it quite unrecognizable from his first term. And we get into that in the book as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I rang him the morning after his win, so a few hours after he'd been declared president again. Just as I've known him 20 years, and I just said, look, he eventually answered the phone. He was pretty tired, and I just said, this is an amazing achievement, putting aside everything else, to win back the White House after 4 years in the wilderness is pretty well unprecedented in the history of America. So congratulations. And I said, how are you feeling about it? And he gave me a little reply. And then he said, things will be very different this time. We spent 4 years thinking about what we should have done in the first term and the way that the system could work against you and so on. And it's going to be very different. We're going to hit the ground hard because we're very prepared. And of course, he hit the ground with a blizzard of executive orders. And, for a while, I thought this was a very pumped up, dynamic Trump who had a massive mandate from the country, bigger than he got first time. And I thought maybe we might see a very different character. But then reasonably quickly, he moved into, I guess you would say, classic Trump, behavior, but also manifesting itself with some odd decisions. For somebody who campaigned on, we're going to keep out of, stupid wars, as he put it, we're going to focus on America first, getting cost of living down and so on, to then launch this war in Iran, particularly given the way it's played out in the last 4 months, seemed to me the complete antithesis of that and a massive, gigantic gamble with his legacy. Why do you think he did it?
I've asked this question of so many advisors of his, and you get different it's not a simple answer to it. There's an answer that a lot of his, I would say, more isolationist, anti-interventionist advisors don't want to hear, but it's the truth, which is that Trump has always been more hawkish, specifically on Iran, than they would like him to be. In the first term, he pulled out of Obama's nuclear deal against the advice of some of his advisors. He also killed Qasem Soleimani. That was a big risk that some warned against. During the 4 years out of power, which we get into in the book, it became more personal for him. The FBI briefed Donald Trump that Iran was plotting to kill him. You can imagine that might have had an effect. And when Ron Dermer, who's one of Netanyahu's top advisors, went and visited Trump after the election, he left that meeting and told associates he thought there was an 80% chance that Trump would join Israel in that war. Obviously, Netanyahu played a huge role, very aggressive campaign. You know, we document in the book him going down to the White House Situation Room and giving this
I've
big
quoted
pitch.
that many times, that piece.
Yeah. But I think, above all, it's a story of hubris. I think it's a story of hubris. All presidents, to some extent, overestimate their power in certain ways and their ability to control events. And for someone like Donald Trump, you know, one reading of his life, I was talking to one of his advisors who made this description, it's a story of moral hazard. You do one thing that's risky, you get away with it. You do something that's even riskier, ultimately you get away with it. You know, 2024, my Lord, you've been indicted 4 times. You essentially defeat the whole US justice system. You come back in and your biggest enemies are basically on their knees. You know, the titans of big tech, you know, Tim Cook is bringing golden tributes to you in the Oval Office. You then have, what is in your view, a very successful campaign against Iran last June. And then you pull off this incredible, no matter what you think about the policy, incredible military operation to seize Maduro. And I just think that, you know, he overestimated the capacity of the US military and the Israeli military to essentially conduct a regime change war from the air. With no ground component, unprecedented in human history, nothing in the intelligence reports to support this. And I think that's really what happened.
And do you think the Iranians realised just how consequential controlling the Strait of Hormuz would be? And do you think American intelligence had worked that out either? Because it seemed to me everybody was slightly running blind about how big that could be. And it turns out it's the biggest weapon that the Iranians have. And they now know that. And you could end up with a situation where this ends with the Iranian regime not only still in place, but actually feeling more emboldened than they did at the start of all this, because they've now got this extraordinary weapon with this stretch of water, which can dictate the global energy market.
It's such an interesting question because obviously it had been contemplated, right? It's in every Pentagon war plan. You know, we have reporting in our book, Trump was briefed on this possibility of the Strait of Hormuz closing. But, you know, it's theoretical until you see it in action, right? Probably I can't speak for the Iranians, but my guess is they knew that it was a possibility, but until you actually do it and see that you can do it, that's something quite different. But this gets back to the sort of magical thinking that defined the planning that led up to this war. Trump himself did not think that this was a possibility, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, because he thought the war would be over so quickly that this scenario wouldn't play out. And again, that there was no intelligence to support that. But the other aspect of this, which I think is something that people don't really understand about this Trump administration versus the first one, is their secrecy is so intense when it comes to matters that they really want to protect, that it means that you don't have certain subject matter experts in the room. So what we show in the book is the 2 people that would be forced to handle the biggest global energy shock in history, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and the Energy Secretary Chris Wright. They weren't even in the room for the planning meetings that led up to the Iranian war. They weren't in the loop. So you're not getting those perspectives in the room. Yes, you're limiting leaks, but you know there are other costs too.
You've had amazing reviews for the book all over the place. Probably one of the most memorable was, of course, from Donald Trump, who over the weekend posted on TruthSocial the book was a joke. 90% of its contents were fake news. If she, Maggie Haberman, your co-author, ever wrote the true story about me, it would actually be quite boring, but loaded with lots of success. He added also, I just finished a perfect physical at Walter Reed. I do it every 6 months. I requested another cognitive test, the only president to do so 3 times. I aced them all, got every question right. Few people in Washington, D.C. could do so, including Maggot, as he called your co-author, and her flunky associate, Jonathan Swan. I'd be willing to bet they couldn't get 50% of the questions right. Anyway, don't buy their book. It's garbage. I mean, I'd take that bet. I would imagine that you and Maggie would probably get 50% or more of the cognitive test questions right. But putting that aside for a moment, A, obviously entirely predictable that he would rage against your book. B, I imagine it will just add to your coffers and sell many more copies. But on a human level, you've always, I think, straddled that line of dealing with Trump very skillfully. It's not easy. You know, I've learned how to do it over the years, fallen out with him, fallen back in with him, maintained a cordial relationship with him personally, but not afraid to criticise him and so on. I think he respects people that at least afford him respect when they deal with him, even if they want to criticise him. But when you see him calling Maggie maggot, for example, and he goes after a lot of female journalists in quite an abusive manner like this, what do you feel about that?
The honest answer, Piers, is I don't have an emotional reaction. I've covered him now for so long. This is my 11th consecutive year of covering him, and the amount of insults thrown, I'll give you an example. I remember back in 2019, I did a story that he really didn't like. And I was meeting with one of his allies, and they said to me, the president has a message he wanted me to pass on to you. And I said, oh, what's that? I said, he wants you to know that you're a piece of shit. I said, oh, okay. It's I don't think there is not a person on earth who could be less concerned about being called maggot than Maggie Haberman. Okay, if the idea is deterring her or whatever, it's so absurd. And I'm more concerned about colleagues of mine getting the FBI show up on their door, which is what happened the last few days, getting subpoenaed. A couple of our stories over the last year have been under investigation for leak stuff. That's the stuff that concerns me. He can call me whatever he wants. It has zero effect.
What do you feel about those subpoenas that have come against the New York Times?
I mean, they're just naked intimidation. I mean, it's not how you conduct. There's no historical precedent for conducting a leak investigation this way. Subpoenas usually the last resort. This is 2 days after the story, FBI shows up on your front door. I mean, it's very clearly designed to intimidate. And we just completely reject it. The New York Times is defending the reporters. They're just doing their jobs. It was if there's ever a newsworthy story, it's about the security of Air Force One, which, by the way, is not just the president who rides on it. It's staff, journalists. It's taxpayer funded, despite what he's saying about the gift. Legitimate story, and we completely oppose any efforts to stifle First Amendment protected journalism.
For somebody who's covered Trump for 11 years, you look remarkably fresh-faced. A lot of the journalists on the Trump beat tell me they're completely exhausted because the guy just never sleeps, even on Air Force One. How have you managed to avoid exhaustive collapse?
Well, he sleeps now sometimes in the afternoon during these long press availability. So that gives you a little opportunity to... Look, as I say to some of, when I'm whining to myself or to others, we're not in Fallujah. We're simply not in Fallujah. Yeah. We're just reporters. There's been a lot of, I would say that there's a temptation to kind of build up journalists into some sort of white knight type figures. And it's not my DNA. It's not Maggie's either. The culture I come from, which I think is similar to the culture you grew up in, my first job was as a copy boy at a tabloid in Sydney as a teenager, where the amount of, I was cleaning under desks and getting printouts and whatever. We don't take ourselves. It's pretty hard to be a peacock in environments like that. So, yeah.
I mean, I would say to Maggie that, on the theme of maggots, I remember Trump getting on a rally stage after we'd done an interview where I said, look, I just don't believe that the election was stolen. And he went off on a rant about me. And he kept ranting for a whole week about it afterwards. And then he went on stage and said that I was so dead I was catching flies, was his exact quote about me. And as you can see, Jonathan, I'm very much alive and well. And there are no flies on me. as there
and
are.
Cristiano Ronaldo says you've got good abs. So
well, thank you for noticing that clip.
Right?
Thank you for noticing the tweet, which I have as my pinned tweet, precisely so that everybody notices it. But yeah, thank you for spotting that. John, it's a fascinating book. I love your journalism and Maggie's. I think I've quoted the piece you guys did a few weeks into the war about that extraordinary meeting at the White House Situation Room with Netanyahu, with the head of Mossad joining remotely and so on, as one of the probably most consequential meetings that's ever taken place in modern times. And the consequences, I felt at the time when I read that piece for Trump, could be enormous, and the consequences for his legacy could be enormous. And we'll just have to see how that all plays out. But it's a terrific book. So thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Piers. Appreciate it.
Piers Morgan Uncensored is proudly independent. The only boss around here is me. If you enjoy our show, we ask for only one simple thing. Hit subscribe on YouTube and follow Piers Morgan Uncensored on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And in return, we will continue our mission to inform, irritate and entertain. And we'll do it all for free. Independent, uncensored media has never been more critical, and we couldn't do it without you.